Today, I'm honored to be joined by what I would consider a friend of mine over the years, Stephen Rosenberg, on our Real Lawyers Have Blogs podcast. And Stephen is one of the nation's leading ERISA and insurance litigation attorneys. He heads the Wagner Law Group's ERISA litigation practice, bringing nearly 3 decades of first-chair trial, class action, and arbitration experience. So he's no lightweight anymore. He's the sole author of an award-winning blog on ERISA and insurance litigation. And, I'd like to talk to him a little bit about that today and more. And he's been recognized as one of the country's top ERISA lawyers. Stephen, welcome to Real Lawyers Have Blogs.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I've been doing the podcast for, we're up about 10 or 12 weeks. It's produced by LexBlog. And what I'm hoping to do as part of it, not only is to introduce new people, but also veterans, so that some of the lawyers can see, maybe that are new to this whole idea of publishing and blogging, or how do I build a name today, what other lawyers have done. What made you, pick up the phone or even think of doing a blog, where you said, maybe I should do this thing?
Sure. So I was, so we're back in 2005, 2006, and I'd published some articles. I really liked writing them. I found I was creating a lot of articles and getting halfway through it and never getting around to finishing them. It was just too much in the crush of business, and there were too many ideas for different articles crossing my mind at different times. And just out of fluke, it must have been, some publication or another. I remember seeing a story about LexBlog and blogging, and I said, "This looks interesting. Let's look into this." And that's how I got started.
Yeah, I remember the first phone call even, because I'm always trying to pigeonhole people into the right topics or the wrong topics, where they know obviously much more about their practice than I do. I wanted to make everybody a hero in their own rights, and hopefully we did along the way. The idea of writing is so much different today. When I talk to marketing professionals and law firms and junior marketing professionals, I don't hear of the term writing. I don't hear of the term publishing ever. Never hear the term publishing. Never hear of even writing articles for publications. I hear of content marketing. There has to be a certain format. There has to be a title of a certain length. There have to be certain keywords. We have to do it so long. We have to delete the old stuff because it could look bad. I mean, when you first started thinking of writing articles, and I went to your site, and there's a boatload of them, what made you think, I should write? Forget before the blog.
Right. Partly it was that the very first time when I was a junior lawyer, the client asked one of the named partners to submit an article to a professional journal he was responsible for. So he immediately said yes, and then walked next door and said, "Guess what? You're writing an article." And they needed a week. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. Wrote a couple more. I tried a couple cases, and afterwards I was still so jazzed up that, for instance, a patent infringement action, I wrote an article for the New England, the Mass Lawyers had some sort of quarterly publication they targeted at in-house lawyers. So I wrote an article on, how to try a patent infringement action when your client doesn't have any money and the other guys are rich beyond belief.
Right.
Because it was a way to continue the fun of it. So have that combined with just, having always enjoyed just wordsmithing was a great opportunity to do that. So all of those pieces together sort of filled up my interest in writing. Plus, in those days, before email and internet, publishing was really the only way, unless you were already part of the old boy network,
right,
to break into our clients and practice areas.
And that's kind of where my question comes from. Yeah, I still believe that publishing is important. You get your name out there for areas that you follow, that you have an opinion on, and people they get your name from somebody they know, and they look you up and they go, "Oh my God, the guy's written on it. He must know something on it." But when I was practicing, there were the gated walls. Who was going to get me in to publish this place or that place? And that's kind of why LexBlog started. I go, holy cow, a lawyer can publish without seeking approval from somebody. They're online and they're rolling.
Exactly.
And now we come, 20 years later, and the concept of publishing sometimes is being dismissed as a way to validate a lawyer. I mean, if you were talking to a young lawyer today, whether it's publishing online or publishing anywhere. What do you see the value, of publishing, whether it's on a blog or other places?
Right. I think it's partly it's still the old-fashioned way of getting your name known, getting it linked to something. When people look you up and Google you or whatever other sources, they use to find out about you, that's what they're finding. You're sort of controlling what they hear about you, what your expertise is. I've had a lot of circumstances in which I've written about subjects and, people have showed up and wanted to talk about it, and then a couple more removed over time. I've gotten work in those areas. And I think the gated wall idea and the old boy networks, it's still really the best tool to get your name in front of people. I didn't come out of uh, a recognized ERISA practice. So I was in a 20 lawyer litigation shop, and there was a in-house lawyer at Aetna who took a chance on me when I was recommended to him by another lawyer. And I ended up starting my ERISA litigation practice from there. But I was an outsider. I wasn't part of the six big law ERISA practices in Boston, which was a very much a closed city at the time, to anyone from outside of the city anyway. So, that was really my way to meet people and get my name known, and that I know my way around this area. And that if you're not going to hire ropes and gray, there's somebody else
Right.
out there.
Yeah, I was talking to a lawyer last week, and he said, the leading way that I get my work is by referrals from other people, but every one of those referrals is looking me up. They're not
Exactly.
And he goes, "So I can't say that they came because they were reading this article and they said, 'Oh my God, that's my lawyer.' Tends to come because they got my name from somebody else. Then they went and looked me up and said, maybe he knows what he's talking about. He writes regularly on this, and that's what he found his blog, where he found his blog hitting his home run. What were your early goals? You sit down and you're going to write this blog. What were your first expectations? What were you thinking?
I think that hopefully I was hoping to get known in this area and get a few more clients. I think at the time, my only real ERISA client was Aetna. And, to expand it beyond that and start to, develop other type of ERISA cases as well.
How did it work?
It worked out spectacularly well. Um, uh, there's been a lot of cases that clearly came to me, not so much directly because somebody looked me up on the blog, but somebody's, an investor or an investment group, an ownership group, they had outside corporate firm, they needed to send him to an ERISA litigator somewhere, and I suspect they wanted to look like they knew one in Boston, and you know, on the internet said he's credible and sent that work over there, and it sort of took off from there. I think my first class action defense cases came through that sort of referral network out of the blog.
Yeah, because I think what's sometimes lost on lawyers is the fact that if I make a referral, I want to look good. And so if you come back and tell me, hey, I went and looked, and they really look like they know what they're doing, you sent me to somebody that writes on this. Well, because you do want to look like that. You're not just sending them off to nobody. And then in that process, you're still blogging now, 20 years later. What drives you to keep doing it? Must enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, I enjoy it. Find that when I enjoy it, I enjoy the writing of it. I keep getting better at it. The focus keeps shifting a little bit. When I started out, there were a lot less publications, a lot less on the internet. Everybody didn't have a newsletter on the
Right.
internet. So I talk about more this new case development or this new decision. Now I've shifted it more to sort of broader picture issues of, new executive orders. And 2008, after the collapse, here's what happened when people tried the same thing and everyone's forgotten these lessons. So I'm going to talk about them now. So it's still fun. It gives me a place to write about different topics and issues that interest me and sort of share my expertise after 30 years and feeling like, wait a minute, I've seen this before. I saw that move. I saw that movie 15 years ago, and I'm going to tell you right now what's going to happen. And it's an avenue, really to put that out there and think about it.
And when I talk to lawyers, I call that the story side of it. You've been around the corner. You can explain things in ways that you've addressed this situation before. as opposed to just giving a straight out summary of this case or that case, as it was handed to you and you now have to do a brief type of thing. One thing that large firms, and I like to just hear from lawyers that are blogging themselves, the large firms are driven by page views, analytics, everything that's just charted. If I were to ask them, do you look at the revenues that were gained or the book of business that was grown by a lawyer or a group of lawyers that were blogging? You might be shocked, but they say no. Um, we don't have a way to track that. We look at the analytics. We look at the number of email subscribers, and as long as those are growing, we're doing a better job, and we're being sold those type of products to measure that by very expensive companies. When you hear that, I don't know what you think. Maybe you think that's great if the competition is doing that, but what goes through your head?
When I bought my first house, we had a disastrous kitchen, and we found a guy who started his own kitchen renovation company because he'd been laid off during whatever economic downturn it was back then. And we found him at like a town harvest fair. He just had a table set up with pictures of his work. And he told me a few years later that a competitor said, "Does that work?" And he said, "Yes." And as soon as he said, "Oh, I wish I hadn't told him that. Now they're all going to do it." Not when I hear that they're all want to make sure they're getting a lot of emails, I'm like, have fun, enjoy yourself. Because I don't need to track it in the sense that, because my relationships with clients are so much more one-on-one. And I know literally there's been over 20 years, literally a seven-figure revenue, ROI on my blogging. I know a couple of large defense cases that came to me and turned into long-term relationships through it. I had a terrific plaintiff's class action for an ESOP, which was the employees were bought out and then immediately the stock was sold by the insiders to a major private equity group for twice as much. To which I tell my corporate clients, the lesson of that case is don't leave a paper trail that you're already getting pricing from Wall Street. That's twice what you're going to pay your employees for it, which had a terrific fee award on it. And I recently represented 20 sort of oil company workers who hadn't had their 401k funded for 20 years and finally got pissed off and decided to sue over it, who found me through the blog. Um, so, and court ordered fee awards on all of those as well. So, uh, because I don't have sort of the big
Yeah.
firm marketing department and rubrics, I know, oh, that case where the court gave us a $400,000 fee, he found me through the blog.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like Jerry Spence would say that 95% of the time, nobody hears what he's saying. Because I try to explain to the firms and the lawyers, hey, this can work. You'll generate work. And they're looking for machines that can prove somehow that these words in the blog post brought that case, where you're sitting there thinking, well, they wouldn't have come any other way. It's like the old days when you're sitting there with the client the first time. You're curious. You want to say, how'd you find me? Why did you come to me? And for me, before I even started a blog, when I was answering questions on AOL, they would actually hold up the answers. And they said, I like the way you explained this, and it made me trust you. That's why I'm here. That's when I realized, wow, this internet thing is it's actually more intimate than techie. That relationship that you could have. Blogging takes a commitment of time. It's not something that just happens every morning. Do you block off times for it? Do you do it when you have fun? There's all different type of styles. I'm just curious.
Yeah, my issue is I usually have more I want to say than I'm actually going to be able to find time. So I kind of wake up driven, and I make sure to find time. I uh, had something I wanted to do. I probably wrote a draft on Monday, tried to proof it last night, couldn't get it done, too tired, finished it this
Yeah,
morning and published it. But when I was first establishing my practice, I wrote all the time, although they were probably shorter pieces than they are now for the most part. Now I sort of have a rubric of, or a saying of, I try to write at least once a week, but no more than twice a week because I just start to feel too much pressure. Wait, I've got 10 ideas today. I'm like, no, I've got to do some work too. Just do this.
When you have the ideas, are these things that just popped up in your mind, or they come from something that you read? Is it a recent update in the law? Where does it all come from?
It pops up from everywhere. LinkedIn posts, the new case law, a newsletter from a law firm on a particular, regulation that all sort of trigger connections of wanting to talk about it. I'm trying to launch a series on where do nuclear verdicts really come from, um, which is really, I keep reading some very good stuff on LinkedIn and other places and DRI publications and whatnot. And I'm like, I spent a quarter century handling the bad faith and coverage, blowback from nuclear verdicts, and you're missing the story. There are certain commonalities every time. If you pay attention, you can see them coming. And I said, I should do that, but I still haven't gotten to it. But the latest impetus for it was I was reading the Washington Post, and there was a story on the Tesla verdict, where an autopilot Tesla had killed a couple of people. And as soon as I read it, I said, every commonality is there. I've got to sit down and actually write this. So, it pops up in pretty much everything I read, because obviously my various feeds over the years, their algorithms have curated themselves towards the things I'm interested in everywhere.
Right. It is nice the way that happens now. You do get the stuff you're interested in, amazingly so, and you're in that conversation, if you will, by virtue of that. This may sound like a silly question, but there's things that other firms don't do. They refuse to cite other people that they read for fear that they would give attention to them. I know you're laughing, because I would sometimes say, well, when you get invited to go to a conference, do you announce that you won't sit on the table with people from other firms or other positions in life
Right.
because you're afraid that you could reference something they say? I know that sounds crazy, but do you find writing on the law, blogging, publishing, at some point it requires referencing what people have said, maybe differing with them, adding on to what they said? I mean, does that flow naturally to you?
It really does. And some of it's just by nature. It's exactly like, going to a conference and carrying on conversations with people about different issues. Some of it is just, they're providing the source material.
That's right.
If I did everything from scratch, I'd probably publish 10% as much as I do. I laughed because I keep waiting for management here to yell at me about how often I'm blogging, I'm citing and crediting their primary competitors, but nobody yet has come
Well,
down and
don't
told me to
well,
stop.
make sure you don't go and leave to a large firm, because all your material will have to be approved by the marketing department, and then they cross it out and they hand it back to you, and then you decide how motivated you are to continue writing that blog post tomorrow morning.
Yeah, exactly.
These are true stories. This is not Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, no. No, I can see that. In fact, over the years, whenever I've spoken to firms, I've been like, that's actually always been one of my questions, tell me about my blog and what are your rules, and is somebody going to have to look at this, and, you know, can I just say whatever I want, within reason? I don't know if they believe me that I've done this for 20 years and I've never said anything that's got me in trouble with anyone. So I already have a pretty good radar of,
Yeah, I mean,
what I can say and
you're not
can't
going to
say.
go to a conference and say things that I know this is going to tick everybody off and get around town and through I mean, we don't say things that are that dumb. We tend to have a license and we'd like to continue to earn a living. That was always my philosophy when people said, well, what are the rules that you're going to have to come up with before you give somebody a keyboard that they can talk? But the reason that I bring these things up is that I have a real passion for lawyers publishing, and I think they advance the law through doing so. I mean, I think you have contributed to the field in ERISA litigation. I think it's better for it. I think that over periods of time, people have followed you, whether they're in-house, an executive, whether they're other lawyers, and the law has grown as we think about the law being brick on top of brick. It builds on itself. There isn't just one person that says, okay, it's this way, or that way. Knowing that, and I'll get to the question, I've been focused on, let's get this law. It is secondary law. Let's look for that type of blogging and publishing over the last 20 plus years since we've been provided this ability to pen things without going through a gatekeeper and get it that's citable and credible into something called secondary law so we can find it easier under different subjects. Do you see blogging and publishing as something that long term could be used if there was a citable way to use it in briefs and whatnot?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. If there's a way to do it, a lot of the sort of secondary sources, the ideas behind it, what does this mean? I'll give you an example. The First Circuit still, in the realm of ERISA, doesn't have a decision accepting estoppel as a legitimate cause of action. And there's very little sort of published decisions at either the First Circuit or the District Court to even talk about it. What's the language of it? What are we referring to? And I think most of what's out there in it really is in blogs and similar analysis of, what does this mean? What is this element? How should you think about it? Why is it this way? Where does it come from? You know, you still get lawyers claiming, even though there's dicta in a Supreme Court decision from 10 years ago saying basically to the circuits, that's a legitimate claim. You need to start adopting it, saying it doesn't exist. And the only real place is to talk about, unless you're just going to cite decisions from other circuits. But if you want to talk about the policy or the idea or the history behind it, it's really in blogs and for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that's lost in gravitas. Lexblog was just able to get the first major legal publisher in VLEX, now owned by Clio, to accept the library that we have, citable and credible information, put it behind so that it can be found by lawyers where they're doing research. My goal is to go to these bodies one after another and say, we'll get out and mine this stuff. We'll find the citable and credible in the midst of all the crazy content marketing that's written by marketing people. Really, literally is written by marketing professionals and sold to law firms because it's too valuable and we can't lose it. Because in many cases, a good lawyer goes to another firm and their content is deleted. It's like a body of work that was lost. It'd be like a law professor, going to another university and they're saying, well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to contact the law reviews and get your stuff out of the law reviews. Well, this is happening left and right because nobody's looked at it from the law side of it. It wasn't the librarians and the firms looking at it. It was the marketing people. And the recent discussions talking to them, nobody ever thought about it from the librarian standpoint or the marketing standpoint that, wow, this could actually be law. Like the things that I used to sometimes as early as the morning of the hearing highlight that I read the night before and said, Professor so-and-so or this lawyer talked about this issue and analyzed it this way. So I'm optimistic that we can get something going in that direction. I mean, can you see the day where you would log into a research platform and then find this information quickly as opposed to trying to find? I mean, I don't know how you would even find every blog thing that's been out there unless you find it randomly.
Right. From a blog, that would really just be, I know the area and it's in the back of my head that, wait a minute,
Right.
so-and-so wrote about this at some point. I know it. I've actually, I had it happen again recently. I actually have had opposing lawyers quote and cite my own blog against me.
Right.
Counsel said, wrote X, Y, and Z, and then I have to explain to the judge, yeah, but the facts are different. That's not, but, so substantively, absolutely, I think and part of the reason they're doing it is partly it's to bust my chops, but partly it's because they can't find anything to talk about, why you should read this particular, regulatory provision this way, except, hey, I remember Steve had something in his blog last year about.
That's happened to other lawyers, and judges have sometimes said, do you think counsel has never taken an opposite position on any type of case before?
Exactly. And that's why I worry about it, because the judges are like, well, yeah.
I think we'll start
That's
looking
okay.
up the cases that counsel has taken on different things, and therefore they can't be here on this side in this case. When I've heard about it, I thought about it like you did. My God, you're citing this person as an authority on ERISA because you're not. And
Exactly.
with young law grads today, and to some extent, they're going through what some of the people in the technical field are here in Seattle with Amazon. I mean, and Microsoft, they're leveraging AI to the hills, and they have to for their shareholders because if AI can do the beginning coding, they're going to use that. And if a senior coder can get something done in 4 hours that used to take 4 days and have it work for them while they're working on something else, they do that. I'm not one of those that says that the law is going to be replaced by AI. But I do think there could be certain things around discovery work, research to go find information and whatnot that may be taken from clerks and young associates. I look at still building a name as still possible for a lawyer and to get out and do so. Do you think it's still possible for that lawyer to get out and build a name now as a young law grad, figuring out a niche, those type of things? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think you can. I think it's even more important. I find, I use AI research tools and other things in ways that basically I think about it as it skips the assignment to the junior associate. Write me a memo on this obscure point so I have a starting point, and then it would come
Right.
back in 2 days. Well, instead it comes back, I do it with an AI assisted research tool in 2 hours. So that work for the associate's not there anymore. But, I wrote a long issue, blog post on this question of, if you look at the history, when I was first starting out as a litigator, they had plenty of jobs for you because someone had to go through all the boxes of documents. Well,
Yep.
that's all gone. And yet the law firms keep getting bigger and making more money and billing even more. There's still, it's just going to be something different for the young lawyers. And I think it really increases the importance that they have a value add beyond the things that, the junior associate research, the junior associate, drafting of discovery answers, all of that basic stuff. Now, where they're going to learn their skills if they don't do that, I don't know the answer to that one. But I think what they have to do is exactly that. How are you going to add value? And a lot of that is you're going to bring expertise and judgment and knowledge of things that allow you to, sort of deal with things that haven't been seen before, deal with new ideas of ways to do things, um, figure out what an argument should be. And I think blogging is a perfect way to get some traction as to how you're adding value. For one thing, is you learn everything about the niche. And two, if you pick your niche well, there aren't going to be a lot of people out there doing that same thing who can say and looking for a junior level job. Yeah, I can do the research with the AI and everything else, but I've also, an expert on this obscure, um, or not so obscure. I'm working on an appeal involving pesticide labeling preemption. It turns out it's not obscure. There's like a gazillion dollar litigation industry related to it. But, to me, as if I were talking to a young lawyer, you become an expert on that because that interests you and you're writing a blog on that, you'll always be able to have a job. You will always be, in demand. For as long as we have pesticides, you will be in demand.
Yeah, it is so true. And I tell people, hey, there's people out there like you. And they go, who are they? How have they done that? Because at the law school level, oftentimes the people in the placement office have never had to do that to get a job. And then the professors are telling the students, please don't blog. You're going to get yourself in trouble and it'll prevent you from ever getting a job because you're going to say something that's stupid. And, and I'm saying, please, there's people are struggling. Let's go to a little bit of common sense. We're going to start a more active law school blog network. Colin will run it. There's a student from a small school in North Carolina that came to us totally charged with the concept that when there's a door that's closed, he was brought up from a not well-to-do family that said you kick it open, and he wants to
Right.
be able to teach other law students that you kick it open, and he's done it with some writing and other work and just ultra niches. around AI companies, explaining that it may not be traditional law. It might be something else that you're learning along the way. And by writing, it's opening the doors to you to do that. So that's what we're trying to do. One question I wanted to ask you, and it piqued my interest when you said now you're empty nesters. Did your family ever talk about what your blog was doing, or dad's blogging, or what is this crazy thing that he's doing? Because not everybody's dad or mom has
Yeah,
a blog.
they do. They it'll come up and I'll say, hey, did you see this? Or somebody will make a wisecrack at the dinner table, and I know they're referencing something I said. And in particular, the ones that jump out, there are substantive jokes about it too. Not being from a digital native era, and they are. They think it's funny that I write about AI adoption in law. They're like, we have to help you find the YouTube channel. Like, yeah, but that's not the same. Uh, but they will point out where in my speed, I relied on the spell or grammar checker, and I've got the wrong there in somewhere, or it's in there, or I have for various reasons, a more casual tone. I like the Oxford comma. I do it by ear. Well, if I was speaking, I'd pause there, so I'll put a comma. And being more formally trained in some ways than I am, they'll be like, "That your grammar there is terrible. Who taught you grammar?"
This
So they'll pick it apart for me.
Do you think about the fact that when we were sitting there blogging, that was considered so new? I mean, I can remember charting the number of blogs, and it was still flatlined. Then it took off like crazy. Now there's everything. I mean, there's people get their news and information from someone they trust. The idea of somebody turning on the nightly news and saying, okay, here's where I'm going to get my news, that's a very small percentage of the population. Do you ever feel that you need to be doing more than you're doing? Stay in touch with the world, or you just let that go? Whether it's TikTok, Instagram Reels, all these things that are coming at us.
Yeah, there are. Sometimes I do, but there's just a finite number of hours. I'm still an inveterate newspaper reader. I do it online now instead of buying 3 different newspapers. So from there to LinkedIn to other people's blogs to there's to I saw you had David Ladd on, to Above the Law, to Bloomberg News online. I'm pretty much maxed out in time I have to consume content, really.
I'll confess that as well. So I go to a newspaper in the morning, whether it's coming in email threads or I go directly to it in my app, and then I look at certain key people that I do follow, and I just recently been looking around TikTok because reading a book, the author said, hey, I'm not embarrassed to say that I get up in the morning and I actually watch this. I watch these feeds as my newspaper. I'm going, really? And I go, my God, I started to do that for a little while, and the feeds were actually pretty good news. It's the algorithms that knows me, by
Makes
doing
sense.
it. I want to thank you a lot, for sitting in on this, and, to get a veteran's view of blogging and pass that on to people in law firms, into law students, and into young law grads. This is still, I assume you would say it's still possible that they make a name based on what you've said. And for those that are listening, you can follow the blog anytime, on where you follow podcasts, or you can subscribe where we'll list it on my website to get it on video. LexBlog has now grown into the world's largest legal publishing network. There's over 60,000 publishers whose content is on the platform. We're expanding that to bring in the blogs that are not publishing on the SaaS platform as well. So that number is probably going to go right by 100,000 pretty soon. And as crazy as it sounds, Stephen, it's going to go by 1 million published works. I mean, which is crazy number. If I would have told you that in our first phone call, hey, don't worry, this is legit. There'll be 1 million of these posts in that period of time. So we're here to support law students and lawyers in any way we can, all the way down to having free models now that are available for lawyers that just want to get started, and law students as well. So thank you very much, Stephen. It's been an honor to have you on today. Take care.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet.